swimming at? Is this going to be like? I'm really experimenting with.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is.
Yeah, it's streaming live to YouTube.
But I was talking to the person about this actually. And I was trying to figure out how to talk about self-firing. And like I had previously written some really intense scenes for myself. Like,
hello, everybody. Going to get started with the event. All right, so thank you all so much for coming out here tonight for this in-person event. What a novelty. My name is Michael. I'm the events director here at Bookstore Magic. So before we get started, I just wanted to point out some logistics for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, we ask that you keep your mask on at all times during this event, covering your nose and mouth, as I see all of you are already doing. We'll be doing hand-raised audience Q&A toward the end of the event, so you can start to keep your questions to ask now or during the conversation. Just raise your hand if you have a question when the time comes. After the talk tonight, Kyle will be signing and personalizing books at the back desk where you checked in for the event. We also have additional copies of Win Me Something available to purchase for my colleagues in the back as well. If you're joining us virtually via the YouTube live stream, hello, hi, how are you? We'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Win Me Something online using the link in the live stream description. All right, so with that in mind, we're very excited to host Kyle, Lucia Wu, and Crystal Hana Kim, who are here celebrating Kyle's debut novel, Win Me Something. In this novel, we are introduced to Willa Chen, a young biracial Chinese-American woman whose job as a nanny for a wealthy white Manhattan family brings up memories and feelings from a life of unbelonging and the racial microaggressions endured throughout. Win Me Something teams with moments of poignancy that NPR rightly called quiet moments that pack a devastating emotional punch that fill this subtle but powerful triumph. And that's just one small snippet of the well-won praise this book has already received. Kyle Lucia Wu has received the Asian American Writers Workshop's Margins Fellowship and residencies from Malay Arts, the Birdcliff Colony, Plimpton's Writing Downtown Residency, and the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center. She's the Programs and Communications Director at Kundiman, where we've done a few events at Books for Magic here, and has taught creative writing at Fordham University and the New School. And as mentioned, Crystal Hana Kim joins Kyle in conversation tonight. Crystal is a Korean-American writer. Her debut novel, If You Leave Me, was a Booklist Editor's Choice title, longlisted for the Center for Fiction Novel Prize, and named a Best Book of 2018 by over 10 publications, including The Washington Post, Literary Hub, and Nylon. She was a 2021 Jerome Hill Artist Finalist, 2017 PEN America Dow Short Story Prize winner, and has received scholarships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, Sewanee Writers Conference, Gentile, and Hedgebrook. She's a contributing editor at Apogee Journal and teaches at Columbia University. So without further delay, Kyle is going to open us up with a reading.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. Is this working? Great. And hi if anyone is tuning in. Okay, so I'm really happy to be here at Books and Magic, my favorite bookstore in Brooklyn, and I will open with just a short reading from my novel. I rubbed my feet restlessly on the Adrian's carpet, pressing my toes into the plush beige fibers so deep that they disappeared. As the afternoon dwindled, the light from their 10-foot windows fell inside honeyed and golden and made me want to fall asleep. I yawned and placed my fingers in a peach ribbon of sun. It was September, autumn only in advertisements, cartoon orange leaves and red backpacks lining the signs for back-to-school sales, the warmth whittling down but still keeping us in short sleeves. Bijou and I were sitting in the entryway. As the most wide open space, it served as her pseudo backyard, a place she could twirl in pirouettes or lie on her stomach drawing, or today, practice downward facing dog. At her school, yoga began in the first grade, so it was her 4th year of practice. She was concerned that I did not know as much about vinyasa as she did. She asked if I could do a split, and I couldn't, not anymore, not since I was young like her, when I wore black leotards in my middle school's basement a dozen years ago. Can you? She asked again. I shook my head and she slid her legs on either side of her body to show me that she could. She was still in her school skirt, a pleated navy blue with the Stanton Academy crest sewn in yellow thread above the right knee, and I noticed she was starting to sprout leg hair. It was so blonde it wasn't visible so much as reflective, shimmering with the last wisps of sun. What did you play in school when you were a kid? She kicked her right leg into the air, away from her tented body, and then brought it in front of her torso, bending it into a neat 90-degree angle while her left leg lay straight. This is called pigeon. Softball. I lay on my side, stretching my arms toward the exit. Kickball. What's kickball? She held her arms out, stick straight like a zombie, and then collapsed forward over her leg. Her school called gym class cooperative teamwork time. I was debating whether to explain kickball when we heard the rumble of the elevator doors. I still felt special about being in an apartment that had an elevator open right into the living room. When I told Lucy about it, she'd marveled, wow, imagine being so rich you're actually unable to lose your keys. Lucy had locked herself out of our apartment twice that month alone. I scrambled to sit up and look alert before Natalie came in. When the doors opened, it was her husband, Gabriel, and I slouched back down. He wasn't home as much, and even though I'd been here for almost 2 months, I didn't know what to call him. Mr. Adrian sounded too formal, Gabe seemed too casual, and I'd never heard anyone actually say Gabriel. He was a doctor, and tonight he'd left his white lab coat on, sticking out from under the hem of his jacket. Hello, you two, he said. He didn't know how to talk to me either. I've been showing Willa how to do yoga, Bijou said, standing up in front of me. She didn't even know what pigeon was. The end of her French braid was right in front of my face. I thought about tugging it, and then I did. She whipped her head around, confused. Sorry, guilt pinpricked my chest. A strand was loose. I rearranged the bracelets on my wrist. Have you heard from Natalie? She hasn't told me what to do about dinner. Gabe's eyes widened a bit, and he shook his head, turning toward the coat closet. No, I haven't. He removed his jacket and then his lab coat, hanging each of them up before shutting the door. When he turned back around, he looked surprised to see me still looking at him. I'm sure there's something in the fridge. I'll go look. I hadn't thought the light meal prep would be so complicated, that there were no frozen fish sticks in this house. There were only meals made from scratch and my constant fear of infecting Bijou with something like salmonella. I'll come, Bijou chirped, skipping until she was in line with me. Taking care of a child meant being under constant scrutiny, no escape for even 2 minutes into the kitchen by myself. I opened the fridge hopefully. I still hadn't cooked without meticulous instructions from Natalie. Bijou had the palate of a classically trained chef. She often asked me to buy langoustines or duck liver when I went to the grocery store and spent her allotted television time on competitive cooking shows. Each time I put a plate in front of her, I thought she might take one bite and give me a rundown of its flaws. Sometimes she did. Bijou was 9.5, but not the way I was once 9.5. How many languages do you speak? What instruments do you play? How many countries have you been to? Can you do a split? I rubbed my temples whenever she started on the litany of questions that seemed so popular among the widely trained. None, nothing, no. Here's some chicken, I said, fishing out some fleshy pink pieces wrapped in plastic. Oh, these shallots are old, she said, standing on her tiptoes to look through a bowl of produce. I still wasn't exactly sure what shallots were. Something like garlic? Okay, there's some tomato sauce. I can make you pasta with tomato sauce and chicken, like chicken parm. I tried to sound confident. Kids were supposed to take what you said at face value. I'd heard that somewhere. But do we have mozzarella for that? Is that what's in chicken parm? Why don't you go talk to your dad, I said. Ask him how his day was. See if he wants chicken parm. I took a large skillet under her gaze and switched the flame on underneath. Their stove's brushed steel was so smooth and easy, a bright blue flame with the slightest flick of my wrist. I drizzled olive oil in the pan and looked at her, thinking, see, I know what I'm doing. She shrugged and scampered out, and I searched easy chicken parm on my phone, then filled up a large pot with water. I could see my reflection in their stainless steel pots, my face bent like an hourglass, a funhouse image of my tan skin, my black hair, my nervous brown eyes staring back at me. I unwrapped the chicken breast and flinched at how slimy and wet they felt between my fingers. When I dropped two in the pan, I immediately felt the hot spatter of oil on my wrists. I jerked away quickly, but Bijou walked in and saw. "Are you okay?" I nodded and dropped my hands to my side. "If you just place it in quick and gently, it seems like it will splatter, but it won't." "What?" I said, dropping another piece the same way. She yelped as if burned. "Oh, sorry." I turned the faucet on and pulled her toward it. "Did that really get you?" "Did you salt the water?" she asked, pointing her chin at the stove. I was about to. I left her with her wrist outstretched under the cold water. As I grabbed the salt, I saw Gabe in the doorway. He cleared his throat. Bijou turned off the faucet and came to stand by my side. She was so tall for her age, almost at my shoulders, and I could feel her elbow against mine as we both looked up at him. "Natalie's over at Amico. She said she'll bring us something to eat from there. Sorry you already started, Willa. She said that she meant to tell you." "Ooh." Bijou reached behind me to turn off the stove. "I love the duck there." I looked at the burners. Should I finish that and put that away, or... The chicken breasts were still half flesh and half meat, like pulsing organs on a pan. "I hate to say it, but you better throw it out. We have dinner plans tomorrow, and then we're away." "Thanks, Willa." They were about to go to bed anyway. I tipped the pan into the garbage and covered the mess up with paper towels. 1, 2, 3 chicken breasts, cage-free and organic. They could have fed me for a week. I shouldn't have asked Gabe. Natalie would have told me something different. Most times while I fixed dinner, Bijou talked about how good Natalie was at making this, how Natalie's mother had taught her that. "Did your parents cook much?" Natalie had asked me once when I'd left the lid on a pot of boiling water and it overflowed onto the stove. She'd been in a good mood that day and had said it playfully, not like the time I didn't put enough breadcrumbs in the meatballs and she'd raised her eyebrows at their soggy shapes. "My mom worked," I'd said with my back turned, crumpling a paper towel into the trash. Natalie murmured something tactfully, and we avoided what was in front of us on the counter. Evidence of Natalie's own career, stacks of folders and files and notes that she'd been working on before she'd been the one to see the lid trembling. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everybody. Can we get another hurrah for Kyle? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. That was so beautiful, and what I loved about that was the quiet humor, right, that we see in the class differences between Willa and Bijou, and something that I really felt while reading Win Me Something was the way that Kyle creates these really precise self-examinations through Willa, and they're such powerful blows to the heart. You know, they're really small moments that really hit hard, and so I really love that that excerpt that you read aloud. Congratulations!
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah. It's just exciting to be in person with people, to celebrate a book. It's just great.
It's very exciting to be here in New York with all of you. Yes.
Yay! So I like to start off with this question because I think that it's so fascinating to see the journey a book takes. So I wanted to ask if you could tell us first a little bit about the genesis of Win Me Something and the way that it turned into a novel.
Yeah, definitely. So when I started Win Me Something when I was in graduate school, and I was working on a lot of short stories at the time, and I was always kind of circling around ideas of family. And when I was in graduate school, I also was working as a nanny for several different families, and a lot of people in my program also were doing that. And at the time, it was really like a linked story collection, so it was Willa in many different parts of her life. Although my thesis advisor told me, just call it a novel, no matter what it is. it's just never stayed a short story collection. But eventually it kind of grew into a novel, and some parts really like swelled in importance and other parts fell away. And I just really liked the contrast of Willa working for this family while she was investigating these ideas about her own.
Yeah. Did you finish the book in grad school then?
No, I didn't finish it. I had a thesis, which was like 100 pages, so it was like several stories. But yeah, I did not finish the novel until probably a year or two after graduate school.
I think it's always fun hearing about that kind of process, and I feel like a lot of people start with a short story collection because maybe the idea of writing a novel is scarier.
It was,
Right?
yeah. I didn't want to write a novel.
And then slowly, as we get to know the characters, we get more comfortable maybe with that idea.
Yeah. It seemed like so much work and so many years, and it was, but I didn't want. I guess I wasn't ready to commit to that early on.
Yeah. And then I was so curious. Do you remember what the first scene you wrote was, and is it the first scene in the novel?
Yeah, the scene that I read actually was the first scene that I wrote, and it's not the first scene in the novel, but it's the second chapter, and it's changed a lot. But the first scene that I wrote was Willa in the apartment with this elevator that opened up right onto the floor. And I was really just interested in the idea of that boundary kind of dissolving in this house for her, or her showing up and just so much of the book is about Willa not understanding the language of this world. And I liked the idea that she would have never even thought that this essential thing of every home, a door, wouldn't actually exist, you know? So she shows up to this apartment and it's completely different. So the first scene had to do with her being on the floor and the different faces she puts on around everyone. So the daughter and then the mother and the father, and how she is with each of them is different. So that's kind of the idea that I started with.
That's so interesting. And then something maybe that you all don't know yet about the novel is that it starts with Willa nannying in 2013, right? But then it goes back and forth in time into Willa kind of thinking about her high school years. So I was curious about that structure. Did you know that would be the form of the book from the beginning, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it definitely came about later because at first there was a whole collection of timelines, and when I felt that the nanny story was the best one to contrast, and I felt like it could uphold the present day section. I was still struggling with how to work the flashbacks and the early parts in and which parts were needed. You know, there's so many parts that I wrote and cut out from the book. But I thought that her being in this house made sense for flashbacks in the book. I thought that it would be like Willa going forward in her present, you know, trying to forget her past, but it made sense that it would kind of stubbornly just bubble to the surface when she's in this experience that reminds her in whatever way. So I didn't want it to be like directly aligned, but for there to be some sort of intuitive sense to how the flashbacks like bubbled back up. So I definitely rearranged them a lot and tried to create some sort of intuitive, logic to how they reappeared.
Was that fun or hard? You know, that rearranging, because it's like a puzzle.
Yeah, kind of fun. I mean, I did that thing where I printed out, you know, everything on my floor and rearranged it on my floor, which took up like my whole apartment. And it is kind of fun to rearrange things because it's so satisfying when they finally click somewhere.
Yeah, I think that I really like that kind of the revision process and restructuring, but not everybody does, so I'm just curious. Something else that I was really interested in that you kind of touched upon was Willa thinking about home, right? And being in this kind of unfamiliar home. And she is a biracial Chinese American girl who comes from a blended family where her parents remarried and had children with their other partners young. So she feels kind of adrift. And I think that for me, one of the central themes was this idea of home, belonging, loneliness, and I was curious what you were trying to say about those themes or what you were trying to explore, and if there were other themes that you wanted the reader to kind of get in their experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a lot I was trying to, I think, ask about identity and belonging rather than answer. I think I started writing it thinking about all these questions that I wanted to ask, but I feel that one of the essential things that I was trying to explore about identity was like the binary aspect of it and the in between of it. I feel like there are so many things that we're really attached to as either or, and not within our identity, but also just within the world. And so especially, it's like good or evil. We're very attached to black and white thinking. And so I was really interested in the effect that has on someone when they feel that they never can slot neatly into one of these categories, and what that does to kind of constantly be just viewing all of these binary ways of thinking and the ways that society relates to you, and just feeling like there was never that place. So I was really interested in what it means when you are not attached to the binary and you can't find your place within that. And in terms of other themes, I mean, yeah, definitely those were all like loneliness for sure is in the book, and it's so aligned with that. And one of the reasons I really liked setting it within the nanny industry in New York was I just felt that really brought these ideas of class to the surface that I wanted to talk about, class and power, and yeah, so that's, I think, identity, belonging, class, power, racial.
I think the class element really shines through in the excerpt that you read, and it's funny, right? The way that Bijou thinks of her world, that is really her world, and the way that she assumes a knowledge or a language, like you said, that is not actually universal. And I think that something that this is not a question, I guess. Something that I loved was just the way you explore class with this kind of precise but light touch, and you use it as a vehicle for humor too. Did you think that there were these moments of humor while you were writing it?
I don't think many people think that my work is very funny. A lot of people come away from the book and say like, it made me very sad. I'm like, sorry.
When you're laughing, right? When Biju's saying like, well, how many languages do you know? Can you do a split? There's something kind of funny about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like there's humor in the absurdity of it, and there's always absurdity to be had within, these devastating moments and these structures, which are also crushing at times. So, I mean, I'm happy that there's a light bit of humor, but usually that's not the thing people come away from.
I know. I think for me also, I felt so much empathy for Willa, and I felt her desire to be seen, and it is such a book about longing, but when there were those moments, it was a nice little reprieve, because it's kind of through the innocent lens of Bijou. But moving on to another question, I was curious about the title, Win Me Something. Can you tell me more about how you chose that title?
Yeah, I'm very bad at titles. I can never think of titles for anything I write. But when I wrote the line "Win Me Something" in very early, because that was also the name of my thesis in graduate school, so it was a line of dialogue, and I kind of immediately wanted it to be the title. And for me, it's because I feel that it's such an open title. There's lots of different interpretations. I like that it sounds active, but it's actually passive. It's a command, but the command in it is a passive command, and I feel like it brings up for me these questions of, who gets to play the game, who gets to try to win, and what does it mean if you do get to the prize without being able to play? What are these experiences? So I liked that there was just several different ways in which I looked at it and felt like it was an open title, like there could be different interpretations depending on where it sat in the book.
Mm-hmm. And do you think Willa feels like she's not even part of the game? Or does that change through her life?
I think that she probably doesn't. Yeah, I think that she feels like she doesn't know how to get to the position to play. Like she's on the outside and she's observing how everyone else seems to understand how to get started, but she can't understand how to get there.
I think that's so interesting. And you also mentioned race as one of the themes, right? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also biracial Chinese American, and I just never, it was difficult for me when I began writing because sometimes I would turn in stories that had, biracial characters, but it just felt like at that time nobody understood why I was doing that, or they felt like it was almost distracting to the story unless the entire story was about, this character being biracial. And I feel like we've kind of moved past this a little bit, I would hope, in workshops, but it was this thing that was, I don't know, I hope, but it was this thing that it was very difficult because there was never anyone else who understood it, and people understood my work a lot more if I wrote about a white character or like a fully Chinese character. But I felt really strongly that I really wanted to write about experiences, that something that felt like more on the margins. And obviously I had not encountered a lot of biracial characters in fiction at all. There's definitely writers who were writing that before that time, but I had not encountered them. So I felt really strongly that I wanted to just contribute like one viewpoint of someone in this identity. And it was difficult because it was something that there weren't a lot of readers for. There weren't a lot of readers who understood the experience, and because of that, it made them kind of look at other parts of the story differently.
I would hope that workshop, or we as a reading culture have also moved past that.
Yeah.
And I think so.
Definitely some places, like here.
Well, that kind of brings me to this question of the publishing process, and what is your favorite part of the publishing process? Because this is your New York launch and your book just came out on Tuesday, so I would assume it feels very new in many ways, but also you've been part of the publishing world, or you've worked with Kundiman, or you do work with Kundiman, and you are kind of part of this community. So I'm just curious, what's your favorite part, best part?
Yeah, I think my favorite part of my publishing process, I guess, has just been like speaking with people who thoughtfully read the book. It was so wild when I first did, an interview or two, and people had just read with such thoughtfulness and come up with questions that were so insightful. And I think that for so long, it just felt like I was writing this book as this one side of a conversation that I had never had and did not know if I would ever have. I felt really hopeful that there was someone else who would understand Willa, and it's been really like cheering to see that people do, especially ones who don't share her identity, because I think I got like a little beaten down in all the workshops and all of the publishing, and I started to think like, I guess you have to be my exact identity to relate to the story from the, you have to also be like a biracial Chinese American girl in a blended family, because no one else seemed to get it. And so then it's been really exciting that there are people from completely different situations who actually want to talk to me about it. So I think that's been the best thing, and kind of what I always hoped for. I was just like, there has to be someone else who feels a similar way somewhere in the world. I know it. So I guess, yeah, just the conversation has been great. Yeah.
And I think that's so frustrating when that happens, because we've grown up reading about white characters or white male characters or female characters, and we don't need to be that to get something out of a book. So that is frustrating when that happens. And there's so much in Win Me Something that is universal, right? That someone reading this book can learn from. Especially, I think you capture loneliness so wonderfully and beautifully, and that's really hard to write about, because it's kind of it's a hard texture to get on the page, right? And I'm curious, were you actively trying to think about how to get across Willa's loneliness, or did it come across just naturally from the scenes?
I definitely thought a lot about like the texture of Willa's loneliness, because I think it's really specific to her situation. I think it's like the type of loneliness in which you are surrounded by people, but maybe observing them somehow makes you even more lonely, but you don't really want to be in the situation where you don't see anyone either, you know, so there's kind of an optimism in your continuing to try. But I feel like Willa's loneliness is not necessarily like she's never around people physically, it's just that she feels very unseen. And I think it's really specific to New York as well, because so much of Willa is observing other people on the street that she thinks maybe have it differently than her. And if you're not in New York, you don't get to observe so many people on the street, you don't get to watch so many things. And, you know, Will is obviously a really keen observer of other people and their lives. And I don't think that would be possible if the book was set somewhere else. Like, I think it's very much set in New York for that experience. And I was thinking a lot, when I wrote it, while I was writing it, I read Rowan Haseo Buchanan's Harmless Like You. And I felt like the way she described loneliness in that book was like, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to describe as well, because in the book she is, you know, within relationships, living with friends, you know, surrounded by people, but she just never feels like they understand her in a certain way. And that was the thing I was trying to portray.
Yeah. That actually brings up another question. What kind of books do you see yours in conversation with?
This is always like a hard question because it's like...
But you brought up Rowan's.
Yeah, Rowan's. I hope that it's a conversation with Rowan's. I always think that, so because I think of Women Something so much as being about someone who doesn't understand like these secret keys to language or existing in the ways that everyone else seems to. You know, she watches other people, she's not sure why they get it, but she doesn't. And I feel like Brandon Taylor does that really, really well in real life with his characters. So I love Brandon Taylor's work, and I feel like very seen by Brandon Taylor's work. So I hope it's in conversation with that book. And yeah, definitely Harmless Like You for sure. When I was writing it, I also read Garth Greenwell's What Belongs to You, and I loved the way he did that second section in the book, in which it takes place in the present day, but he receives like a letter from his father, and then the second section is like a 40-page sentence that's this rush of a flashback. And I loved how it really deviated from the form and the structure of the book to like catapult us back into his mind. And because I was dealing with like the flashbacks and kind of trying to figure out how to integrate them, that one was really inspiring to me as well.
So I think I'm gonna ask one more question before we go to Q&A, but there's something really bittersweet, I think, about publishing your first book, because it is such a special experience, but then it's your baby that you've worked on for years and then it's out in the world. So just thinking about the years that you've worked on this book, was there a favorite part of the writing process or the creation process?
Yeah, I think that something that was so formative to those years, though, was my real fear that the story would never get told. And so, like all of those years, there was so much joy in the writing, but I almost kind of missed it because I was also like very afraid that it would all amount to nothing. And something I love about writing is that it is this world for you to escape to, you know, like where I like to set aside time in the morning, and if I get to go and write for 2 hours in the morning, like the rest of the world isn't really there, and it's like I always feel like I have something to do. So if I'm not writing, I feel a little scattered. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just feel very unfocused. You know, I don't have this thing to ground me. But I also feel like for a lot of those years, I kind of missed that. I missed that joy that I was in because I was like always really afraid of how that time would be so wasted. But I always did know that it was like a good place for me to go to, because whenever I would, you know, finish the project and send it out or take a break, I would always feel like kind of sad, like it was this place I always wanted to go to. So I think the thing that I love most about writing is it creates this like secret world for you to exist in.
I think that's beautiful, and I think that's the mark of a true writer. You find such solace. Is it solace? Solace? I don't know. You find such solace in the world of your imagination, and you would rather be writing than not, right?
Yeah, definitely. I always feel a little bit sad when I'm not writing. Yeah.
Me too. Me too, for sure. If I go for a couple of days without writing, I get a little disgruntled. And I'm like, why am I in bed with But I think that's a beautiful kind of sentiment to end our conversation on, and just to see if other people have questions for Kyle. Anyone? Yes.
What are you working on now
Okay,
or
so
next?
the question, I'm just going to repeat it for the YouTube audience. What are you working on now or next?
Yeah. It was so interesting that while I was writing the novel, I could not write another thing at all. People kept telling me, "Why don't you just like take a break?" And I just couldn't. It was like I couldn't think of any other ideas at all. But once I finished it for real, I'm in a writing group, and for a little while we all did like flash fiction stories every month, and that was really fun. I did start working on like another novel, but just the beginning of it. It's still a work in progress, but I haven't really been able to delve into it too much the past month or two because of all this. So I have to say, like, even though I'm really excited, I'm so excited about the book being out, like I still have this light, like, oh, it'll be so nice when things settle down and I can kind of like escape and work on that a little bit more.
That's exciting. Other questions? Yes.
I don't know if you talked about this before, but can you talk about the novel in relation to New York and being in New York now, after having not been here for a while?
So the question was, can you talk about the novel in relation to New York and being in New York now after not having been here for a while because you've been in Los Angeles, right?
Yes, it's so interesting because I've lived in New York for 13 years before I moved to LA, and I feel like being apart from it, I can see New York with such a clarity I really couldn't see before because I was only here, and I moved here when I was 18. And so that's why when I think about, Willa being in New York, I really understand how it wouldn't have worked somewhere else, like her story wouldn't have worked in a different city. And I'm so aware of the solitude that exists in New York, but the kind of solitude that doesn't feel quite lonely, because you're always around other people. And it's a place where being solitary is really acceptable, where people are always out to dinner, out at the bar, just by themselves, and you would never like blink twice about it. And I also feel like the energy in New York is, it's not found elsewhere. Like you walk around by yourself, but you don't feel alone. And I think that's important because I think Willa has this push and pull between being in New York and seeing all these people and wondering like, why do I not, belong like they do? But she also continues walking around and feels like she is a part of something in a way because she's here in the city and she could pick up on that energy.
I think that is really special to me. If she was in LA, she would just be driving around and looking at people from.
She would just be in the car, She wouldn't be seeing everyone.
I saw two questions here. Would you like to go first?
I was going to ask, how do you feel that the process of writing your first novel will inform this process of writing the second?
How do you feel the process of writing your first novel will inform the process of writing the second novel? Which is a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm telling myself it won't take as long this time, but it probably will. I think that I do feel like once it came together, I was like, oh, of course that's the way it came together, but it took me so long to figure out the structure. And I kind of feel like with this novel, I really started more with the character. I really started with Willa, and I spent a lot of years like casting things around, trying to figure out how to tell her story. But I feel like with my next project that I'll be more focused on starting with the structure first, because the structure took me a really long time to figure out, and I feel like structure just doesn't come as naturally to me as character and voice, because I felt really quickly like I understood Willa and I could like meander forever in her voice, but that wasn't really helping with any of the drafts. So I feel like I feel motivated to start with structure next time and maybe start with the thing that took so long to figure out. So we'll see if it takes 7 years again.
Books just take the time they need, And I saw a question here.
Yeah, Kyle, I wanted to ask you about plot and story, and I'm going to try to phrase this question in a way that isn't a spoiler, but I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this isn't a book where like huge things happen in the sense that like there's not an affair and nobody dies suddenly in the middle. And I wanted to ask you one, and yet it has this really propulsive quality, which is so impressive as a writer that it's not a book with a traditional like grand plot and yet has this propulsive quality. So I wanted to ask you if you in the writing process you ever were considering a more traditional plot, or if you always knew that the book was going to come from story and character.
So the question was about plot and story and how in this novel, and this is not a spoiler, but in this novel there isn't some kind of dramatic event like a death or something large like that. And the question was, during the writing process, did you ever think about having a more traditional plot structure, or did you always know that it would be driven by smaller story and character? Did I say that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. That's such a great question. I think that it took me, a lot of this book was really kind of also uncovering the ability to trust my instincts about stories. So I definitely tried to take a lot of advice along the way and put in things that people thought would help the book, you know? So I definitely tried to put in things that might have been more traditional plots, like early on in the beginning. But it was not ever something that felt right to me, and then it didn't feel right in the book. And then I published an essay that talks a little bit about plot a few days ago, because I felt like when I was thinking about the things that I felt like were really formative to Willa, no one else seemed to think that they were formative, right? But I mean, I felt like growing up, the things that were formative to me had gone really unnoticed by people. And so I was kind of thinking about the shape of narrative and why does narrative have to be domineered by these same types of events that people are always reading in books and continue to be, propelled by, sure, but why does it always have to be those? So I was really interested in kind of like swelling these small moments larger, because the biggest thing in your life might not be the thing that like an outside force would feel is big. Sometimes it's these small moments that really stick with you, and since this book deals a lot with things like microaggressions or Willa being unnoticed, I thought it would be interesting to try and make people see that, these small moments were just as formative for Willa, and also that one of the things she kind of struggles with is she feels like because she's so like in between things that people aren't paying attention to her. So I really wanted to like challenge the reader to follow Willa, even though there might not be this like immediate pull, this plot point that would really draw people in. I just wanted to challenge people to find her worthy of being told a story about anyway. Like why does someone have to have something huge and drastic happen to them to deserve a story about them? So I was trying to play with like that idea of who deserves to be talked about.
That's such a beautiful answer. And I think that the way that you so tenderly give space to those quote unquote small moments are the heart of the book. So I think that you've really succeeded.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anyone? No? I just like to like. I don't know. Sometimes people are shy.
I have one.
Yes.
So when we were talking about themes, something that really resonated with me was your use of describing food. Did that play a big role carrying throughout the entire story for you, and was that intentional?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, let me just repeat the question for the question was about the theme of food coming out in this book, and was that intentional on your part?
Yeah, I think that it kind of began as unintentional, and then it, as I worked through what the themes would be and what I thought was important, it took on greater importance. But I've always, I love writing about food, one, so it would just kind of show up. But I also thought it was important that cooking and feeding yourself and food and eating at home, this is like an essential thing that happens, an essential thing that families do is they eat their meals together, and I felt like for Willa, this would be something that everyone else has this strong backbone of learning to cook with their mom and eating dinner around a table. And people expect you to understand how to do these simple things like boil water without like making it overflow. And it would kind of be this other mark of her feeling, alienated from these things that normal people know how to do. And then I was also thinking about food as, being Asian American, because food is this really loaded thing where, people project so much onto you about like the food from your culture, or appropriate so much about your culture, or like to like assume that maybe you're the expert. And it's kind of another reason that Willa is alienated from her culture, because she doesn't actually know that much. So I feel like there's so many meanings and so much weight behind food, and I love writing about it as well, so that's part of why it's there.
And even in the excerpt that you read aloud, it shows her awkwardness in the class aspect of Bijou wanting duck legs and langoustines, which I had only tried, I think, as an adult once. And that actually makes me wonder, did you take any of those scenes from your nannying experience?
The nannying experiences I have are so much worse. Yeah, no, they're all like, so none of the nannying scenes actually happened, though. A lot of the kids who I nannied for had really sophisticated tastes. Also it's like if you grow up in New York, you really are growing up in a different world than if you grow up in a suburb, just by nature of what is on the street, So I did encounter a lot of kids who had, really sophisticated eating habits, or all kinds of habits, very sophisticated. But the nanny stories I have are both like sweeter and like a lot worse, but not to be repeated on the live stream.
Yeah, of course. It was hilarious because I've never been in an apartment where the elevator just opens into, so I was just wondering if you were inspired by personal experience.
I actually nannied 2 times in an apartment that the elevator opened right up into the floor. And because I used to work at a catering company as well, I've seen a lot of these apartments in my different jobs. So when I would work in a catering company, and you would go to people's homes a lot, and these would be like really, really fancy homes, and a lot of them would have these elevators that opened right up. And I still remember feeling really like, you can acclimate to anything, so the first time it feels like a lot, but then you're just like, oh, it's just one of these again. So I had seen that in multiple of my jobs in New York.
Wow, okay. A whole new world, or at least for me. Any last questions before we move on to signing? Can we just all say congratulations? Thank you all for sharing. Congratulations. Winning something is such a beautiful book.
Thanks, Crystal.
All right. So just a couple last notes about the signing. So like I mentioned at the beginning, the signing is going to take place at the back desk where you checked in when you came into the event. So you can start lining up along this back wall to get your book signed. We also ask that you refrain from coming up to the office. We can actually get past to the back desk. Yeah, that's basically it. Thank you all so much for coming out and supporting this wonderful, wonderful book and our bookstore as well. Let's have one last really big round of applause.